I'm Michael Moynihan. Welcome back to the Free Press Live in Chicago at the convention, along with Batya Ungar-Sargon, my co-host and the opinion editor at Newsweek. Batya, I think I had a little bit of excitement for Bill Clinton, but I didn't remember how bad he was as a speaker. It's actually true in the sense that if you try to look back and like, what is a memorable Bill Clinton speech, I remember certain things. I remember Fleetwood Mac playing and then getting up on stage in 1992. But not so great as a speaker, I think, historically. But good Lord, he looked old.
Yeah, it's amazing. He's only a year older than Trump, but I mean, this speech is we cut away from it because we got too bored.
Yes, we were too bored. I don't know. There was nothing happening. I literally don't know. I'm looking over, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, at my friend and actually my co-host on another job that I have, the Fifth Column. Camille Foster is with us, and Gabe Fleischer. Your Substack. First of all, you're like 16 years old, right?
22. 22.
You've been doing this since you were like 12.
Something like that.
The name of the Substack?
Wake Up to Politics.
Wake Up to Politics. All right. Did you wake up during that interview? During that speech? It was absolutely horrible.
I think, if there's one thing Bill Clinton and Democratic conventions known for,
Bill Clinton.
He used to talk. I mean, his 88 speech, he was famously like, the first cheers of that speech were, "In closing."
Yeah.
So that's definitely, there's some history with that.
But the thing is interesting because the New York Times reported today that he scrapped the first speech and then went back and he was reading off paper here and not the teleprompter. And that's what he came up with, which was a bit of a rambling mess. Camille Foster, did you pay attention to that?
I think it might have been a little more compelling had he actually, not been 100 years old tonight.
Yeah.
But
younger than Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Yeah, but all in all, I mean, it's one of those things where I have to wonder, like, this is a political convention. The speeches are only going to be so rousing. Every one of them can't be a hit. And there have to be these moments where you bring in the old guard and give them an opportunity to weigh in on things.
But let me say this, and I'm going to throw this to you, Batya, because Camille says it's a convention. It can only be so rousing. When you come as a journalist, by the way, you always have to tell your editor nothing really happens at the convention. They're vibes pieces. But last night, Barack Obama reminded us that he is very good at this.
Quite good.
Did you not get that feeling?
Well, okay, but before we move on to Obama, because I want to discuss that in depth with our guests, I wanted to ask you guys something about this question of who was included and who was excluded. So including Bill Clinton, who, by the way, on CNN the other day, I think it was 2 days ago, S.E. Cupp, one of their commentators, said, why is he here with his history of women? Aren't we turning a page? Blah, blah, blah. So he was included, and yet Mayor Eric Adams of New York, extremely popular mayor, was excluded because he criticized the Biden administration's handling of immigration. And the head of the Teamsters Union, my personal hero, Sean O'Brien, was excluded. The head of the Teamsters, 1.3 million Teamsters, half of whom are Democrats, he was excluded. He was ghosted by the campaign because he had the audacity of speaking at the RNC where he lectured Republicans about workers' rights. So my question to you guys is, what do you make of these inclusions and exclusions, and how does that reflect on the kind of party that you think the Democratic Party is trying to portray itself as?
And also remember that Sean O'Brien is a Shonda to the Irish people, and regardless of what you said, he's a disaster.
You are a Shonda.
Yeah, I know.
He is a hero.
Get out of here. Tommy Pinko Sim.
I guess what I would say, I think it's true. I think Bill Clinton, clearly not quite the messenger he once was. I do think, though, the inclusion is less about what he's saying. It's the symbolism. They've had, I guess, except for Jimmy Carter, every living former Democratic president. Jimmy Carter's grandson also spoke, and JFK's grandson. It's really setting up the contrast of they had kind of the whole party's past, passing the baton, passing the torch over to Kamala Harris, contrasted, of course, with the Republican convention, where you did not find George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, any of their kind of elder statesmen in their party. So I think that's really what the inclusion of Clinton's about. I do think there's fair questions to be raised about his history with women, and I think there's some Democrats certainly that kind of scratch their heads at why he's included, considering some of the party's messaging on that. But I think that's really what him being there allows you to say is this whole party is kind of united, rallied behind Kamala Harris, whereas the Republican Party, a lot of his critics within the party and a lot of the kind of people who were led the tickets in the past, nowhere to be seen in Milwaukee.
And that's a matter of self-exclusion. I mean, you could hope that W would show up. He wouldn't come. most of those people who are recognizable, very prominent conservatives wouldn't have been there if he had wanted them there.
I'm not sure.
They wouldn't have come.
Yeah.
So to the extent they were excluded, they kind of cut themselves out of the party because the party has moved on and is now very much the party of Trump. And I think that's right. The Democrats want to project this sense that Kamala is part of this great and grand tradition of elder statesmen and statesmen from the Democratic Party, that the party is fully unified. And quite frankly, that has been the greatest success of this convention for Democrats. At the moment, they do look considerably unified. And I'm curious, is AOC the only squad member who has spoken at the DNC?
The only one who's spoken, like Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush, they've all been shown on campus.
I think Jamal Bowman was in the park across the street, but I can't be sure about that. All right, do we want to, speaking of elder statesmen of the party,
yeah, we have a few.
Should we check out? Should we check out Nancy Pelosi?
Oh, here we go. She's Nancy Pelosi's up. Let's
and somebody who is up there in age and quite coherent. Apparently Bill Clinton just wandered off stage and she wandered on. But we're happy to have her. We're happy to have her. So let's watch a bit of her. Rather anticlimactic, yeah. I just said she was a great speaker. I think she is good when interviewed on cable news. I don't know who wrote that. Again, a couple of very good days. And I want to talk about that briefly. Just as a general impressions, watching this stuff, and have you been in the hall?
Yeah, I've been in the hall both nights.
So what's the kind of vibe like there? What did it feel like to you?
I would say the vibe is highly energized. I mean, I've been in the hall both nights. I've been talking to Democratic delegates, members of Congress, governors, whoever I can find around the United Center, and they are all highly energized. And then you ask them all, what do you think this convention would be like if it had been Joe Biden?
Exactly, yeah.
Very different. I talked to Dean Phillips yesterday, one of the earliest Biden critics. He said he thinks the mood would have been funereal, was the word he used. And instead, they have what everyone is describing to me as just a flip of a switch. Yeah. And suddenly they are all energized and excited. I mean, that is a very energized.
All right, but so speaking of Dean Phillips, right, he tried to enter the primary. Yeah. He entered the primary. He did not get very far because the DNC was pretty clear about who, not having an open.
Go ahead.
No, this is important. Is he not upset, resentful? Is he not in the coup team, that this is stolen from him more than anybody else?
Again, I mean, coup, definitely not the language I would use, but I asked him about that. Well, I asked him not if he was angry more, did he feel vindicated? I mean, he was the first, for months there were polls showing 80% of Democrats didn't want Biden to run again, and there was basically one member of Congress, and it was him. He said that he doesn't need to feel vindication, doesn't want any glory. He said, perhaps slightly self-aggrandizing, that he feels he's happy if he was just the Paul Revere to Biden's George Washington. Yeah. That's what he told me.
He's been using that line. We had him on the live stream from the RNC, and he said something similar.
He wanted to be the messenger. Yeah. He feels like he just wanted the party to have their best chance to win, and he feels they did that by
I pointed this out a number of times before. Everybody thinks that this is a new phenomenon. If you look back in 2022, I think it was June or July 2022, you see polls that have a majority of Democrats saying that Joe Biden shouldn't run. Yeah. 2 years later, the coup happens. The thing happens. Let's call it the thing. And everyone says, God, that was a lightning speed. Yeah. The American people, despite Operation Bubble Wrap, have been kind of pointing this out to themselves for a long time.
For a very long time. And unfortunately for Dean Phillips, I don't think he's going to get any garlands. No one is going to say, gosh, you were right about this. He blew himself up, and there is no political benefit to it. He was out of step with the party. But you talk about the energy at this particular DNC, the enthusiasm and excitement. Just think about where we were only a couple of weeks ago. Everyone expected the DNC to be a total calamity, whether it was Joe Biden who showed up or a brokered convention. What no one expected is what is happening
1968
now.
All over.
Sure, and what no one expected is what's happening now. Yeah. Everyone rallying behind Kamala, the party completely unified, and everyone selling her as the second coming. Yeah. It'll be very interesting to see if she can live up to the billing on the night that she has to give her speech. I expect Walz will do pretty good because he's been fairly good so far.
Yeah, he's been pretty good. I mean, what do you make of Walz behind the lectern? I mean, he's kind of your cup of tea, right? Being that you're that you're a filthy red.
The thing about Tim Walz is he is right out of central casting. Like, he is an actor pretending to be a folksy normie when actually his politics are pretty far out of the mainstream for sort of the kind of people he dresses like, right? Dresses well like, right? That's my impression. What do you guys think of him?
I mean, I think this is what I'll say, talking to the Democrats who I've talked to around, I do think convention, I think, as we brought up, it's a lot of speechifying. It's a lot of politicians getting kind of stale talking points. To me, the moments that stick out at the conventions are the more kind of human, authentic moments. I think Jasmine Crockett had one of those the other night. I think the parents of the hostage who spoke had one of those tonight. I do think for a lot of Democrats, I think obviously not everyone views him that way. To Democrats, they view him as not a politician, as an authentic. He talks like a coach. He talks like someone they know in their towns. I think that's a fair point to make. His policies have clearly evolved throughout his career as he went from kind of a rural congressional district to the whole state of Minnesota, which is obviously trending blue. But he still, I do think, has retained that persona, and I think it is quite effective on stage. He does not come across like most kind of buttoned-up Democratic politicians. He comes across much more kind of like a folksy dad, and I think that is a persona that it worked for Joe Biden for a long time. That's a time-tested method for a lot of Democratic politicians.
There is something that offends me as the son of a union worker, and it is the fake folksiness. It is the fact that people are now calling him coach, not assistant coach, by the way, not defensive coordinator. Doesn't ring, right? He's coach. And his wife today, I don't know if you saw this, his wife today tweeted a picture of Tim Walz sewing his own flannel shirt. I mean, like, buy a fucking new one, buddy. Like, come on. Come on. This is the fake folksiness. And we saw that with Republicans in the past. And the great example of that was Lamar Alexander, who in '96 he had the flannel as his logo. That was his thing. It said Lamar with an exclamation point. I always do that with the flannel because he drove a truck. But then he started talking and everyone's like, this guy's a total phony.
Okay, so here's my question. Like, it seems like the Democrats have read the room. They've understand that the kind of coastal elitism is alienating a lot of the people they need to win.
A lot of yes.
But my question is isn't Tim Walz just the identity politics version of like white suburbia rather than an actual deep look at how their policies have hurt the working class and benefited the college-educated community?
I certainly don't think that's how Democrats are thinking about the thing. And look, I think it's fair to criticize Walz's politics. I think it's fair to talk about how far he is from many Americans with respect to social policy. But he's the vice presidential pick. And so far as he has particular political positions, people are paying more attention to the party, well, not the party, but this particular campaign and really the top of the ticket. And at the moment, they're able to project all manner of things on Kamala, and even more so with Walz. So in that respect, to the extent he can pull off his act, as they all are doing some sort of act, and Kamala can keep it together at the top of the ticket, then this will probably be a pick that doesn't hurt her. He seems to be pretty good with respect to the rollout, certainly not having the kind of disastrous start that J.D. Vance has been having. And just kind of calling balls and strikes. He looks like a decent candidate when he's out there on the stump. Is there a possibility that some of these other issues will become germane in the campaign? Perhaps. It's certainly the case that there are plenty of military people who won't vote for the guy.
Not a big issues campaign, Camille.
We just haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah. So, you said, these are, you look for the human stories, a lot of speechifying. I always think of conventions as we're going to set the vibe of the party, the agenda of the party. And you see a real reset here, right? They're going to go with progressive things that are popular with Americans, like abortion issues. But, the reset here is very, very different when you're outside the hall, much smaller protests than we expected. But you go inside and people are handing you USA signs. I mean, that's a pretty interesting thing. Cutaways to people in red, white, and blue. Very, very patriotic language on stage. A lot of uses of the word freedom. No, I'm not saying that you have to believe it.
Yes, patriot. I'm just saying that doesn't. I don't remember because I've been paying attention. Because obviously the RNC was heavy on love of country, love of God. But here, there's been very little about America or like.
I don't mean that in a Lee Greenwood kind of way. Republicans don't do it that way. Democrats don't do it that way. But there has been an emphasis on America's a great country, as opposed to Kamala Harris in 2020, right? That Kamala Harris is talking about America's sordid past.
Yes.
This is talking about the positivity towards America's future. Is there any policy positions in that? No. Is there a vibe shift? I think so. But Gabe, I want to ask you something. Let's take something like abortion. They're hammering this one hard because when you look at those poll numbers, that plays well for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that is one of their most potent political attacks against Donald Trump. There's no doubt. Again, I think to your point, when you look at the polls, most Americans, more and more Americans describe themselves as pro-choice since Dobbs. That is clearly where the trends are going. And even Trump himself, you see him kind of trying to dance around the map. He's never really given a clear position on abortion throughout this campaign. Yeah. There's an abortion referendum in Florida in November. He's a Florida voter, has not said how he'll vote on it, and there's a reason for that. And you see him trying to kind of bring the party somewhat more to the center on the issue, but that's difficult because obviously where the party is historically, I think. Whether it's not a very issue-oriented campaign, I think it's true that they've yet to really roll out most of their policy positions. Then again, she's the vice president of the United States, so you look at the administration she's the vice president to, that gives you a rough idea of where most of their positions are. But I think this is clearly one where a lot of Biden's policies are clearly unpopular, and this is just a clear issue you can use to kind of hammer them.
Let me ask a specific question about Kamala, because I've been feeling myself sort of drawn in both directions on her. Mm-hmm. Like on the one hand, they'll play these very moving clips of Shirley Chisholm, right? The first Black woman to run for president. And then they sort of try to shoehorn Kamala into this civil rights struggle. And they use the music, and I find myself getting emotional. And then I'm like, wait a minute, it's Kamala Harris.
Yes.
That struggle is over. It was won. And she did not come from that tradition. She is not from that background. And then I get very sort of outraged at being asked to see her in that context, almost like it's a degradation of that history, but also I feel gaslit while also falling for it.
What do you mean by she's not from that? I mean, you sound to me like you're skating awfully close to what Donald Trump has said, saying that she's not half Black and half Indian, which she is factually.
An African American. She's not ADOS, right? She's not an American descendant of slaves.
She's Black. She's half Black.
I'm not talking about her race. I'm talking about her genealogy. I'm talking about.
Camille, you want to jump in here as the son of Jamaicans?
Not really. It always seems to me that most of the debate about kind of Kamala and her background is somewhat silly. Is she Black? Is she whatever? It's all kind of ridiculous and idiotic. To the extent we're talking about her as Black, it's because we're applying some sort of one-drop rule, and it's all stupid. So I could set all of that aside and just address this question of the civil rights movement and whether or not she was actually a part of the struggle, et cetera. I can remember a moment in the debate when she insisted that busing had some major impact on her personal. She was that little girl, so to speak. So at least for a while, this has been kind of part of the mythology surrounding Kamala. But no, I think it's pretty difficult to actually make the case that this ought to feel profoundly historical, apart from the fact that there's going to be someone of a different gender sitting in that seat. But she was the vice president. She has been a senator. She's been the district attorney of a major American city. This is kind of just one more thing that she would have done. Would it be profoundly important to her personally? Sure. Does it mean the country has reached some new plateau? I don't really think so. At the end of the day, what ought to matter is substance on policy. We don't really know where she stands. For all of the talk about abortion, I have absolutely no idea what Kamala proposes to do about it as president of the United States. How do the two actually work together? The two things that she mentions all the time: abortion and January 6th. January 6th, I understand we're upset about that. And in general, many people, including myself, think it's probably disqualifying with respect to Trump. Now, making the case for Kamala, I'm not sure how that actually factors in, except I'm not him. And for a lot of Americans, that won't be enough. That may not motivate them to vote for her, even if it doesn't nominate them.
It is not enough. Camille and Gabe, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And apparently, this is a video. I don't know what this is. Apparently, I was at a protest, a pro-Palestinian protest. And
as you do.
I filmed something, and I haven't seen this. I don't know what it is.
Let's watch it.
Yeah, we're going to watch it. It's going to be the first time. This is like those old world premiere videos on MTV. This is showing my age. This is me at a protest yesterday or 2 days ago. We are back. We've come back from that amazing, scintillating video in which I point out one very important thing about the protests is that when anything bad happens at these protests, there are 700 media cameras and 7 protesters. And it reminded me, and I said this to my producer, it reminded me of the photo from the 2016 election where they were waiting for something, 2016 inauguration. They were waiting so desperately for something to happen that someone kicked over a garbage can, set it on fire, and there's a photo of about 15, 20 photojournalists around taking a picture of it. But that's neither here nor there, because we are back with someone who joined us from the RNC, a former Democratic candidate for president, and as I said during that stream, author of 450,000 books. Marianne Williamson, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. But did you just say I was joining you from the RNC?
No, you did join us from the RNC. Do you remember?
Oh,
yes, it was. Yes, it was from home. It was a Zoom.
I've been trying to figure out what are you talking about.
Yeah,
no, right. Then we did. I do remember. It was great. We did. Yeah, fun.
Tell me what you have made of the speeches of the convention so far. What's your general takeaway from it?
I thought the talk tonight from the parents of the hostage, Hirsch, was very moving. You know, because I've run, because I feel that I'm speaking from sort of the inside the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
I see 2 separate universes.
Yeah.
One universe is that which is for me, it's for many people, a conviction that Donald Trump should not be president again. And therefore, a decision that I will vote for. Appears to be Kamala Harris, seems to be the only. But the hoopla of the machinery, the performative drama, I see as a product of a system that is very problematic. And even though we have an immediate issue here, which is to make sure in this case that Kamala wins, on the other side of this, I feel that there's a deep-seated corruption within the political system, that none of this hoopla, it's like whipped cream on top of some very, really corrupt and poisonous stuff. The political system in itself, that I see as a reflection of some of the worst aspects of our modern culture.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Tell us about the poison, where exactly it is, how we could fight it.
Well, you know, I used to feel that too often these political parties were representing the interests of huge corporate entities. Now I realize they are huge corporate entities. They're not just representing the interests of huge corporate entities, and they behave at times with the ruthlessness and the soullessness that we associate with too much of modern capitalism. I think there's such an ethical breakdown in our society. I think that in anything, the process by which you achieve a goal is as important as the goal, and ultimately determines, you know, Gandhi said the end is inherent in the means. Modern politics has this ruthlessness, the end justifies the means. Doesn't matter who we mess with. But as Gandhi said, the end is inherent in the means. And there's this ethical carelessness, recklessness. And we talk about how, and I think this gets into much of what I've heard you talk about, we talk about how it's the dominance of money. It's more than that. It's the ethical breakdown in American society today. The things that are considered okay to do, and especially in politics. And I see, and yet, for me, part of the ethical issue is that not time to talk about too much of that right now, however, because the biggest job is to make sure that Donald Trump is not president again. So there are many, it's like a circus with many rings for someone like myself.
You know, for people who generally agree with that analysis of American politics, I mean, you can't help but feel despair in some way that, you know, you are not somebody who's destitute. You have a name. People know who you are. You have money. You can raise money. And you just run into a wall. There's no way to get through it. So those of us who say, like,
add to the list of reasons that is shameful is you had a platform that represents where the actual base of your party is at.
That's right.
and you brought love and spirituality, which we are all very much lacking to the process. So I just wanted to add to
I'm lacking it too. I have no spiritual. I'm just
to the outrage of how you were stonewalled. So we have finished.
But it's the boring but necessary question: is that how do you fix this? Because you've tried, in the sense that you're running for the presidency of the United States of America, and you know, as you say, that the Democratic Party, much like the Republican Party, are themselves corporations, right?
There's so much with what you said and with what you said. First of all, the kind of money that I have and that I am able to raise is so minuscule compared to the amounts of money that these machines are operating with. That's number one. Number two, I think it's really interesting something you said, because I agree with what you said. What someone like myself is talking about is where people are. And when you said people despair, I would despair were it not for the fact that I get that the people are not the problem. Yeah. I traveled all over this country for the last year and a half. And remember, I did this before. The American people are ready for deep, true, real, noble. You know, we're hardwired to do great things in this country. I mean, we're a country that elected Abraham Lincoln. So I don't get that the American people aren't ready for depth. I mean, I've known this in my career for a long time. People hear you at the level you speak to them from. You have a real conversation about the Declaration of Independence. I don't care if it's Democrats or Republicans. They lean in. Let's talk about what happened in 1776. Let's talk about what happened with women's suffrages and abolition and the founding of the labor movement and segregation and civil rights movement. The people are ready to get real, but there is institutional resistance to the kind of depth that I think is the conversation we need to be having, because nothing else is deep enough to sustain us. I'll give you an example. You're talking about all the rah-rah, happiness, joy. And we need to be facing what a sobering moment this is. People are dying because we're not getting it right. I'm not even saying who's not getting it right. That's not even the question. But that we're not getting it right. The people who are dying in Gaza and Israel, the people who are dying in Ukraine, the people who are dying deaths of despair, the opioid crisis, children afraid of gun. We're not. And, I have a career that's been with people who, the joke about me has been, nobody calls Marianne when things are going well. It's when that's just how my career developed because of my work with AIDS. Somebody just got the news, the test results came back, it's cancer. Your child is addicted to meth, somebody died. And I've seen over and over again what happens when people get the worst news. Within 5 minutes, layers of ultimately meaningless preoccupation just drop away. And people get really adult really fast and really mature really fast. And that's where this country is ready to be. But we have to get there. And I think the people are ready to get there. People know this isn't it. And so, once again, when this is over, no matter what happens, no matter who wins, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on, if you think that if your guy wins or your girl wins, no matter who it is, then everything's going to be great. Something needs to, I read about the idea that these are chaotic times, that there's chaos out of which will come a new order. But I think we have to be in a very wise and sober and serious and grown up. It's so immature. I think our main political conversation is not worthy of us, not deep enough.
Can I ask you about Trump specifically? Because, he came to a party, one of these corporate machines, the RNC, at a time when the party was, neocon, pro-war, free trade, free market oriented, anti-abortion, anti-gay, and anti-union. And he has sort of reshaped the party. It's now anti-trade, anti-war, abortion, states' rights, 15 weeks. It's pro-gay. He took the anti-abortion and anti-gay marriage language out of the RNC's platform for the first time in 40 years. He really took a wrecking ball to that corporate entity. Do you not find anything in that to admire, if not in terms of content, at least in terms of strategy? Oh, and the pro-union thing, having, Sean O'Brien speak at the RNC. Is there nothing there that sort of boosts your spirits about the possibility of such creative chaos and destruction towards more of a people-oriented platform?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's a more people-oriented platform. But the first things that you were saying are the product of a powerful leader. But there are powerful leaders who represent great moral advancement, and there are powerful leaders that represent regression, and history is filled with both. So the fact that he was able to take an institution and reshape it, I will give you that. The idea that he's weak and ineffective is absurd. I'll give you that. From my perspective, when I think of the traditions, Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. I do get that there are high-minded conservative principles and high-minded liberal principles. I think he's run roughshod over high-minded conservative principles. So the fact that he's smashed the machine, which is, I do think, why so many people supported him to begin with, he smashed the machine. He had the power personality to do that. So did some of the worst people in history. So do I see any good in some of what he's done? Yeah, there are some places where I can say, he got a point. That's not to be discounted. But in terms of his overall effect, first of all, his pathological lying, his character, his lack of any sense of serious, even understanding, much less respect for the traditions of American democracy. So those things override for me facts that every once in a while I'll give it to you. I'll say, that's interesting that he said that, and I won't make fun of him for those things the way some of people on the left will do, including some things he said recently.
Marianne, you obviously think the greatest danger to America right now is another Trump presidency. You also have a very dim view of the Democratic Party. If Kamala Harris is the only kind of bulwark against another Trump administration, would you go out and campaign for her?
Yes, and also, you just said I have a dim view of the Democratic Party. I would actually...
The machine, I should say that, right?
Yeah, yes, and I think that there's a misunderstanding on the part of the party. I grew up in a home where no matter what year it was, if there was an election and you asked my father, who'd you vote for, Daddy? He said Roosevelt. I mean, I grew up in a home that was so Democratic and had been a Democrat all my life. I ran as a Democrat because I believe in the traditional pillars of the Democratic Party, which is namely that the powers of government can be used to help people. I'm in that sense, a Democratic traditionalist. So whereas some people within the Democratic Party today look at someone like myself, like she's trying to hijack the party. No, they hijack the party. I represent the voices of Franklin and Eleanor, and to me, they represent the DuPonts and the Whitneys and the Morgans.
People that say you're trying to hijack the party.
Nobody thinks I'm that powerful.
No, I know. Well, you said
but the ideas that people like.
I was going to say, who are these insane people?
No,
if you go into the convention hall, are you treated in a particular way? Do they say, "Oh my God, this is Marianne"?
No, it's bigger than that.
Like you?
They wouldn't give me a ticket.
Oh my God!
Really?
They wouldn't give me a ticket. Now listen to this.
Oh my God!
I did get, despite. So I know. I'm laughing. It's so absurd. So let's like think about this. So what we have is a political media industrial complex. So from the first day I announced this time, first of all, let's go back 4 years. I was given, I think for a minor candidate, I think last time I was given, I mean, they make fun of me. They're going to make fun. I mean, they're going to make. Yeah. But in general, I was on CNN a fair amount, given that I was a minor candidate. Same with MSNBC. I got a CNN town hall. This time, get rid of it. There will be no opposition to Joe Biden. I was blacklisted on CNN. I was blacklisted on MSNBC, and that's Tulsi Gabbard talks about that. It's a playbook. There was a decision it would be Joe, and it was said that there was no other credible candidate. In their mind, we're not. To me, the qualification should be the qualifications as articulated in the Constitution of the United States. I fit. Yeah. Also, this idea that we don't primary an incumbent. Well, I'm old enough to remember when Eugene McCarthy primaried Lyndon Johnson. Nobody thought it was weird. We thought it was democracy. People primary incumbent senators and congresspeople and mayors. I mean, that's what you do in a democracy. But and then, despite all that, we got 500,000 votes. So how much more can I be in the process as a Democrat? And they wouldn't even give me a ticket. I couldn't even get in.
But you
I can't. I've been here in Chicago. I can't get in.
But you still came.
I came to Chicago. Well, came to Chicago because I thought a lot of stuff was happening like this around it. I wanted to be in. But then friends have said to me, well, we can't, like one woman who's working, she said, oh, I'm here and I'm doing stuff and I can get you in. And then two people, including a former head of the DNC, that I'll get you a ticket, both said to me, well, we need to know first that you're giving a full-throated endorsement of Kamala.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Thank you, Batya. Thank you.
This is horrifying. This is
thank you.
But
thank
I'm
you.
thinking about
Thank
this,
you.
and like,
Thank you.
and they call the other side dictators. Like,
Thank you,
this is
Batya.
a dictatorship of like. They're so terrified of her weakness, they will not let you in the building.
No, it's so absurd.
Oh my God.
And yes, I am voting for Kamala.
Well, that's what makes this even more
I don't
upsetting.
owe it to you to what?
Because compare you to RFK Jr. and how he has behaved throughout this entire process.
But I don't like what they're doing to him either.
But the lack of grace and the just, this is so unacceptable. I mean, I cannot believe this. I'm in shock. Have you ever heard of anything like this?
Yes.
And by the way,
Yes. For hundreds of years I've heard of it, yeah.
But I want to say something else here. If 500,000 people voted for me in a close election,
don't you want those voters?
No.
Yeah. I mean, when I got out of the election last time, when I got out of the race, Bernie Sanders called me. Elizabeth Warren called me 3 times to ask if I would endorse. Last time was very different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so upside down. It's supposed to, what I have to prove to you, I think it's supposed to be the other way, you know?
Yeah.
And like I said, they're different rings, and we can't have Donald Trump. So,
Well, Marianne Williamson, you've come to Chicago. We hope that we see you breach the gates to get inside the United Center.
I hope so.
I mean, let's see what we can do. Let's get some tickets for you.
I said, that's okay. I'll go do the free press.
Yes, that exactly.
I'll
right.
go do the free press.
You're always welcome.
Yeah,
there.
thank you.
Losing.
Thank you. And I'd love to talk about some other things. And let's talk about Israel sometime. I'd love to
Yes.
do that with you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Marianne Williamson, thank you very much for
Thank
being
you.
here. And we talked at the top of this hour, wherever the hell we are, with this very bizarre convention and the bizarre timing of it. We say only tell you by the day of.
I know.
You have no idea what's happening.
RNC, by the way, they would tell you at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
Literally, it was like, this
the
one's
minute.
speaking
Yeah.
at 10:04, and this one's speaking at. It was very organized.
But we talked at the top about the kind of the patriotic vibe, the kind of trying to be a little more bipartisan
Which I
and inclusive.
disputed.
Which you disputed.
Oh, wait, I have to
And
have one more
inclusive.
thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I have to have one more
Yeah.
thing, okay?
Yeah.
I was going to speak at a caucus today. It's called Progress Libs. I was not, because I was told, are you ready? Drum roll, drum roll,
Yeah.
drum roll.
Oh no.
I'm too old.
They told you that?
I know. We got to make sure everybody has a voice. POC, LGBTQ, trans,
Yeah.
Everybody's got to have a voice, which I agree. But meanwhile, half of America's seniors are living on less than $28,000 a year. It is absolutely a crisis in their lives when they don't have hearing aids, glasses, dental. But no, you can't speak. You're too old.
They didn't say that about Joe Biden
That
for a very long
wasn't the
time, by the
DNC,
way.
but it was someone in one of the issues around, and I thought,
Oh my God.
yeah, I can't even. I'm even kicked out of the ring around the thing. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, guys.
Well, we had Marianne Williamson on, despite her age, because we don't discriminate like that. We love her. We love her 85,000 books that sell 80 million copies apiece. Check them out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
joining
It's
us.
wonderful to meet you.
And let's throw to this clip here, because we were talking about this before, about that kind of attempt at inclusivity, and it, kind of making the left flank of the Democratic Party cringe a little bit. This is Barack Obama in a kind of coded way talking about, I don't know, what do we call it? Wokeism? Is that right? Is that what we call it? It's kind of a dumb word, but let's take a look at Barack Obama. And Barack Obama wowing the crowd, wowing the whole arena, which I wasn't there because we were preparing for this. I was outside the arena. But there were some people at the Free Press that were there, and maybe at protest too. Peter Savodnik, welcome. And Olivia Reingold, who decides to get very comfortable here. It's very unprofessional.
Shoes on.
Very unprofessional. These are not our couches. And you cannot put your shoes on.
I did think about it, but it's
comfortable.
Just,
They're very comfortable.
I'm just comfortable.
Hard to do an interview in this, but Peter,
too comfortable.
were you inside during Obama's speech?
Yeah.
What? I mean, we got a lot to talk about, but that just, I was watching it on a stream, which is not really getting the whole thing, but it was pretty well received.
So
I'd say that, right?
Peter wrote an amazing piece for the Free Press comparing President Obama's speech and Michelle Obama's speech. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your piece and your impressions?
So thank you. I think that Obama played the role of, party cheerleader. We have a steep climb ahead, and our job is to, mount, the hill, and we will take on the Republicans. We're going to win. And it was very much sort of about kind of go fight, win, and let's do it. And it was very inspiring, and it reminded you of the 2008 campaign. And it was very evocative and compelling,
and kind of centrist in parts too.
Oh God, yeah. I mean,
about regulation. He's talking about building regulations and talking about kind of the wokeness thing of don't be mean to people who disagree with you.
Nor did he talk much at all about anything he did in office except for the Affordable Care Act. That was, I think, the only substantive, thing that he accomplished that he actually touched on. Everything else, the whole kind of 8 years was kind of glossed over. And I think it was really, he talked about Biden and he talked about Kamala and about sort of, the challenge ahead. And I think, he sounded anchored to the, sort of the reality of, doing battle with the Republicans, but it was very, kind of optimistic in tone and very Obama-ish.
Yeah.
Michelle Obama struck me as much more, I think, sort of attuned to the anxieties, the fears of a lot of people on the progressive left who I think genuinely fear what a second Trump administration would mean, who I think, can't sleep at night often because of that. And she talked about her feelings of mourning. She wove together her weaving of she wove together her mourning her mother's recent passing with this sort of feeling of mourning of the America that Barack Obama had helped kind of lead America toward, having been kind of abandoned or jettisoned somehow. And I think she did, sort of touch on or kind of in a way kind of address this kind of underlying, very, very kind of, I think, disconcerting question that I think Democrats frequently try to sidestep, which is, the election of Trump amounts to a refutation of the whole 8-year Obama tenure. And so I think, there's this sort of complicated, grappling with that she really got at last night, which I thought was fantastic.
But here's my thing, okay?
Yeah.
It was a refutation of Obama and Clinton. It was a refutation of their economic policies, which immiserated working class Americans. And yet, if you believe Michelle Obama, she wants you to think that if you have nostalgia for 2019 when you could afford groceries, that is like having nostalgia for the Jim Crow South, right? That has been the vibe here, is that Trumpism is not the return of the repressed, of the working class in America who has been put down again and again and again by the very Democrats who used to represent them, right? But that it's the return of some sort of racism or sexism, and they use all of this language to sort of convey that, when the truth of the matter is that Trump is polling at 40% of black men. Before Harris entered the race, he was getting the majority of Hispanic voters, right? He has put together a working class coalition that is multiracial and multi-ethnic, and that is the refutation of the later Obama years, no?
I think, to be fair to the Obamas, I don't think that Trump is simply a refutation of their economic policies. It's more yes, I think there's something to that, but I think it's more that, look, the promise of Clinton and Obama was the forging of this kind of liberal populism, and in both cases that turned out to be something of a joke, right? So this was about sort of recentering, American politics around a kind of a workable middle where we embrace markets, but we also don't allow, anyone to be left behind, and we certainly don't allow for the sort of the demolition of Main Street and all that, and And obviously, like, Obama didn't deliver on that front. But then again, I don't know that he could have. We're talking about like these, huge tectonic forces that, I think if we're being honest, like no president really has any power over these things. But the reality, the political reality just didn't match the, rhetoric and sort of the promise of hope and change. And so I think, Trump was able to tap into the zeitgeist, the anger, the anxiety. I don't know that, we can lay this on Obama's feet. Just I don't think that we can, suggest that like, Trump somehow like rectified all that like, Obama or any of his predecessors failed to accomplish. So I think, I think it's a little more complicated, but I do agree that like it does amount to a kind of like a rejoinder to sort of the failure of like Obama's like, liberal populism.
Olivia.
Yes.
You're a bit of a stunt journalist these days. You have to put a helmet on for the reporting that you do. Why?
Yeah.
Like everywhere you go, I see a dispatch where there's a gang of people around you that look like they're about to beat you up.
I did tell my producer.
Is that happen again this time? Did you get...
You're
doing protest stuff.
I would say I was harassed this week, probably once and a half, something like that.
You are very brave. You are very brave.
That is kind of you. These people, I don't know what they're capable of. Like, the most extreme thing about them so far seems to be their language. Which really the next step genuinely would just be like, I'm going to kill you, like rhetorically.
And to be clear, these are the protesters.
These are, I would call them anti-Israel.
Or were you like, these are jokers who all they have is their signs?
I did. Okay, so I know there's been a lot of talk about the protests that happened outside the Israeli consulate yesterday, and everyone's like, there were just as many journalists as protesters. But it's like, okay, you should have seen these protesters because they did not mean well. So
was it a small group, or is that's a splinter faction of the, I don't know how many people, 1,000 people or whatever that were marching the other day?
Yeah. So how they actually advertised this rally was they said, if you thought Monday's march, which was the one that they were calling family friendly, was it was in comparison though. But if you were satisfied, you thought that was a successful way to get to the Democrats, don't come to our rally. Like if you thought that we need to go much further, come out tonight outside the Israeli consulate. And so about 200 people showed up, dozens of whom ended up arrested. They really are the most extreme elements, not even of the party, because these people, I was kind of surprised to learn that like maybe one man I spoke to out of the 2 or 3 dozen protesters I've spoken to since I've been here, consider themselves a Democrat. It's communist, socialist, Marxist, anarcho-capitalist, lots of variations.
There was a flag of the Hoshaist Stalinist faction. And if, dear viewers, if you don't know who Enver Hoxha is, that's going back a little bit. An Albanian Stalinist dictator that they have adopted.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow, obscure. Good
yes,
for them.
I saw the flag and I said, there's something off about that.
There's a scholar.
There's somebody who likes Enver Hoxha and Albanian Stalinism. But that kind of underscores something in a way. It's like, these are just jokers, right? I mean,
I don't know. It was really okay. So I think one way to think of everyone focused about how many journalists were covering that rally, but honestly, the real content creators are the protesters themselves. It was like a TikTok content creation hub where they were like filming videos. They were like,
film your crimes.
Pigs, imperialist pigs.
Smart
basically
people.
with like ring lights.
Wow.
Enver Hoxha never had a ring light, by the way, for the record.
I don't know.
No, trust me on this one.
He
As a scholar of Albanian communism.
So anyway, I don't know what you were saying. Sorry.
No, I was saying, like, are they kind of jokers? And I'm wondering what everyone thinks about this in a way, because, like, you go back to all the comparisons to 68, right? And you read a book like Brian Burroughs' book, Days of Rage, which catalogs the hundreds of bombs that were going off in the early 1970s in New York from Puerto Rican terrorists, and like there were Croatian terrorists. It was kind of crazy. But they felt they were pushed to a certain point. that the revolution was around the corner. It would precipitate it if we set off some bombs. And they didn't have social media. They were just, and that happened. I mean, are we in a place, and this is an honest question, I don't know the answer to this question, that when you see some of these people that are carrying flags that have killed far more people than Israel, I mean, in the existence of the country in an afternoon, if you're Mao, and they're carrying these flags, is it, are they going to be those people that get to that point?
I think they certainly are shock jocks, and
I got to interrupt you because Oprah's on, and we got to see Miss Oprah Winfrey.
Pop off, Queen.
Wow.
You knew. You
Oprah
just wanted
Winfrey.
me to do it.
We are back. Oprah Winfrey doing some sort of show tunes. It's like, I'm going to ask you a question, Peter Savodnik.
That's great.
Coming soon.
I prefer it that way from now on.
I'm going to say that Batya said something
billionaires. I hate it. And this is something that conservative billionaires, they don't lecture you. They shut up and they enjoy their money. And these people know they should not have this much money. And so they lecture you, and I hate it.
Was that a lecture, though? She was singing. Come on.
No,
we tuned in right when she was saying, get out there, independence.
Okay.
I think it was the Pritzker thing yesterday, the tone deafness. I'm a real billionaire.
Exactly.
Like, no, dude, that's not how you do it.
That was a bad moment.
That was a bad moment. But Oprah Winfrey, a very, very nice person who I once interviewed, and it seemed very humble. And while we were talking, a person disappeared, and I looked around. This person got down and changed Oprah's shoes for her while I was talking to her.
Wow.
You don't have a shoe changer?
I do, but I had to, inflation. I had to let them off. But it was so crazy because she was talking about a school that she had and the African school, and I was like, literally, there's someone changing your shoes. Nevertheless, she was a very nice person. Before we get back to Olivia telling us if there's going to be a bombing campaign from the radicals,
God forbid.
Not a ton of celebrities. I think they've done that deliberately. I mean, you can, as a Democrat, you could do only celebrities. John Legend's playing tonight.
Right.
And, the Republicans had Lee Greenwood.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good comparison.
But again, it begs the question.
Be in the arena.
Yeah. It begs the question, and I want to know what you all think about this. Why is it that all of these billionaires and celebrities are so heavily weighted on one side? Like, what's the source of that, Peter? What's your take on that?
I have no idea, actually. I mean, I think that.
It didn't used to be this way. In the 40s, Barbara Stanwyck was a Republican.
Sure.
That's unimaginable.
The 40s was almost a century ago. So I think it has been a long time.
But also in the 40s, there were a number of Stalinists in Hollywood, too.
Yeah.
But it was presumed a long time ago that if you lived in a rich neighborhood, if you made a lot of money, you were a Republican.
And now 65% of people, 65% of Americans.
This is her whole thing.
It's my whole thing.
65%
of Americans who make more than $500,000 a year now are Democrats.
Right.
What is each of your take on why that is? We have to get to the bottom of this.
Me. Okay. You're
on TV now, Peter.
65% of the people who make over. I mean, it probably has to do with the changing nature of our economy, like where people are making money, which industries are generating the highest paying jobs. And yes, please, you say something smarter than I am.
Okay. Well, I guess first of all, maybe they vote democratically, but I bet if you talk to a lot of these people and really were like, do you want to be paying for migrants to live in a hotel indefinitely in New York City? They might be like, I don't know. So I guess I would question whether or not they really buy, the most progressive elements.
I feel like the opposite. I feel like these people love paying higher taxes. They're so rich. And it's like an indulgence. It's like especially they love it when it's illegal immigrants.
But don't you think in private, they do break from the party in some ways?
This is true. This is true. I mean, because there's two questions here: is what you tell people and what you actually believe.
Yeah.
I think it makes them feel better about being so rich.
The Free Press, I'm sure, can attest to this. The Fifth Column can attest to this. The podcast that I do with our former guest Camille Foster. people send you messages
Yeah.
that are in Hollywood, in the music business, in the arts,
Yeah.
like in New York City,
Yeah.
like gallerists, artists who are like, I'm on your side. Do they say that publicly? Absolutely not, because number one, there's like the social cachet that you want. Number two, you want to work again. And I know people who have big businesses that are in New York City that they say, if I ever was revealed to even have one aberrant thought, I think I'd probably have a hard time.
But I would argue they're on your side culturally because you're against cancel culture and they hate feeling censored. But like economically, you're a free market person, so like of course like they like that stuff.
Yeah, I don't
They're
know
like,
if that's
why. Wouldn't they?
I think more the social stuff, the cancel culture stuff, was a real wake up call to a lot of people, and a number of people who did things that were, you know, in their art, which then they were punished for. But I think one of the other things is geographic, right? I mean, you see people in, you know, people who become famous who come from more rural areas and didn't go to Yale and didn't go to Berkeley and didn't go to Stanford tend to have different politics, I think. I mean, I can't prove that, but I know people that are smart people, successful people, but they're like from West Virginia and they're going to have different politics.
Right.
You know?
Okay, let's get back to Olivia was going to tell us about.
Speaking of rich radicals,
yes, exactly.
Who is that? That's
the ones that you were following around.
Oh, actually, interestingly, I do think that this is a way more blue collar working class bunch. The Ivy League,
what does cheating mean? Just turning towards it more?
You know, encampment, intifada people did not show up. It was more kind of like Starbucks barista vibes. Maybe did some community college. It was much more humble, actually.
The one person I talked to inside the arena for the Free Press that said to me, this is absolutely stunning to me. There were two students, very nice people, at an Ivy League school. And I said, what's the number one concern for you? You know, these polls, like top 3 issues.
The
economy.
Uyghurs.
Yeah.
Right?
She was like, hard Uyghur.
Yeah, absolutely.
Number 1, you know, economy. Number 2, immigration. This is the general thing.
Wow.
Number 1, trans rights. She said that the number one issue, more important than the economy,
absolutely.
I think the universities might be failing us.
There has not been a single trans speaker. Did you guys notice that? There have been gay speakers, but not trans speakers, which makes me think that the Democrats understand that that's kind of where middle America is at. You have a lot of people who are basically, the debate about gay marriage is over. I mean, the Republicans now support that.
Over by many years.
The trans issue is something that even most mainstream Democrats are not on board with. Peter, do you not agree?
The debate over gay marriage is over, but I think also to a large extent the debate over trans rights is over in the sense that the Republican base is, I think, more or less where the Democratic base is at. And so, you know, like,
Which is where?
I mean, I've been
to
countless like Republican events, rallies, campaign events, and I've never ever heard a single person, either on stage or just in the crowd, ever disparage a trans person. Yeah. The feeling is always the same, which is keep your ideas out of the schoolroom. You keep my kids or my grandchildren, sort of away from this stuff. I want them inoculated from this. I don't want them exposed to all this. I want little boys to be able to grow up and then decide for themselves what they're going to be or whatever. And I think the thing is, most Democrats are probably aligned with that.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't really make any sense for the.
No, but it is interesting because the people, I feel like the delegates that I've spoken to and just the attendees, they do mention trans rights. But the party leadership that obviously plans the speakers and things like that, I would assume have looked at the numbers.
I mean, if you're like me and have a sort of libertarian attitude about trans people, I mean, I don't do whatever you want. I'm totally fine with all of it. One of our best, most devoted listeners of Fifth Column is trans. I try to use the pronouns. I screw them up every time. But I think that what you always have to realize when you're running a national party is that radicalism of any sort, revolutionary ideologies never work. And what's happened, I think Peter is right, that we're pulling back in some ways from the more extreme elements of that movement that a lot of the media, including the place where I used to work, would give them a lot of column inches.
But I don't know.
But that's such a small bit of a small group of people. And I think that it was like, okay, you had your time. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes that.
I think that's how that appears during the DNC.
Yeah.
Because obviously they want the party to appear unified. But I think once they actually have to compete, get out there and compete, for Michigan, let's say, I think we could see something different.
I think so. Explain why.
Because these people, so the protests this week have been smaller than expected, but I don't know what will happen when kids go back to school. Like I said, the people who showed up, I think, are a more blue collar working class crowd. But I think once the Ivy Leaguers get back in school, they create content based around this. I mean, I've seen videos that at Barnard or Columbia, they're already kind of giving students that are simply moving into the university that the protesting students belong to. They're giving them a hard time. They're already finding opportunities to protest. So I think that this movement could pick back up in the fall closer to Election Day.
Yeah.
And they do pose an unanswered question. I actually spoke to Democrats inside the arena who feel a little queasy voting for Kamala because of what they perceive her Israel policy is.
Yeah, I think. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I was going to say, I think one way of looking at the protesters is as like a leading indicator of where the party is headed, and I think part of what wound up paradoxically sort of undermining like the protest movement or the protesters outside the United Center is that the party, like today's Democratic Party, is much more amenable to or open to sort of radical ideas than the Democratic Party in 1968. So there was this, very, very sharp division between sort of like the party faithful, the people inside the hall in 1968 and the people outside. So there was a kind of an inevitable kind of clash. But I think today, the cordons of security notwithstanding, you have people inside the hall like, Rashida Tlaib or the rest of the squad or,
Ilhan Omar.
Or just like, I think a lot of Democrats in general who are a lot more sort of open to, kind of radical ideas. And so that winds up sort of like taking a lot of the wind out of their sails. So yeah, there's room for people to protest, but like, do they really need to protest that much when you have people inside the hall who are...
They're being listened to
inside they're being heard.
That's a really good point. We've got Pete Buttigieg on right now.
Oh, great.
Let's take a listen to that if we can.
Welcome back.
Reactions?
Michael Moynihan, Batya Ungar-Sargon, Peter Savodnik, and whatever your name is. Olivia Reingold. It's a full Free Press team here. Mm-hmm. What did we just watch?
Guys, reaction. Come on.
That was a perfect PowerPoint, DNC speech. Everything was timed perfectly. He hit all of his points. Like, it was crisp. It was, and he was very, it was kind of inspiring. Like, it was the right, tonal shift. The problem, and I guess who just hasn't been watching that closely over the past decade, is that it sounded totally inauthentic. I'm sure there's like something heartfelt, buried deep inside. The crispness, the kind of like the careful plodding from one bullet point to the next.
That's for the movement, and that's how you end up leading the DOD, right?
That's exactly how you want to.
We need a guy like that to make the trains run.
Yeah. There's a reason, like
I like you just called him Mussolini, but it's a subterranean Mussolini.
When we dropped down, I was like, what is missing that Obama has, let's say?
I know.
Yeah, that is a great
I have the answer, which is why they pay me so an exorbitant salary.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about that you see with Obama, the cadence is right. He feels like he believes it. There's a moment, and when you're watching a political speech, you ever have the moment like, is he using a prompter? Because he looks like he's not using a prompter. He's just talking.
And
he is. Yeah. Pete Buttigieg did the thing that every half-assed politician does. At the end of the speech to rouse the crowd, he just speaks louder. No emotion. It's just a louder Pete Buttigieg. There's nothing in it. There's no feeling.
No, I feel like you just basically what you just said is like you believe Obama more. But why?
It doesn't matter what he says. It doesn't matter. It's why he wins elections.
This is not very scientific here, but Obama appears to be a better hang. Pete Buttigieg, not a good hang, right?
Yes.
It's just that Obama takes risks in his speeches. Like he says things that
he made a dick joke.
He made a dick joke
at the DNC.
But not just that. He also not so subtly, was criticizing sort of the progressive flank of his own party and saying enough with like he didn't use this language, but it's sort of enough with like sort of like your illegal tendencies.
Yes.
That's a risk. There was nothing that Buttigieg said there. It was not perfectly kind of calibrated to placate everyone there. And the thing is, everyone knows that. They feel it. It's like they're nodding along.
It was phoned in. Like he literally said, we need a better politics. A more inspiring politics.
We shall go forward, not go back in the time machine.
We should want things that are good.
Yeah, like, go back
what?
But as a Donald Trump stan, it's a language, right? Stan, that means somebody who's obsessed with somebody, right? A lover of Donald Trump, tattoos him on your neck. The one thing that surprises me about every other candidate and politician is they spend all of their time excoriating him and no time learning from him. And the thing that you should learn from Donald Trump, and it's the most important lesson, is that he's funny. Full stop. I mean, Shane Gillis, the comedian, said in his last special after Biden was like, he said, can we all admit that Donald Trump is funny now? And it's like, we couldn't have admitted it before, but that was a kind of a poisonous thing. We also couldn't admit that Melania was a very attractive first lady. No one pointed this out. The model first lady, no one talked about it. But the thing with Trump is that you saw him on Theo Vaughn's show.
Yeah.
One of the most hilarious bits of television where he becomes the interviewer.
Right.
Talking about cocaine. He's totally mystified by cocaine. He has great comic timing. Obama's the closest, right? Is there anybody on the Democratic side who is funny beyond him in a non-elected official like James Carville? I think has a good.
Well, and to add to that question, so Olivia, like, have you heard anything here that you think would make people in your generation be like, oh, these people understand what we're going through and what we're facing?
Phenomenon or whatever.
Oh my God.
Is that,
I don't know what that means.
Do you think
I still don't know what it means.
that people are going to vote on vibe, like younger people, or you guys have real economic problems. Is there anything that
you've got a lot of problems?
I know 0 people who are homeowners. Okay, what would make them vote?
No, I'm saying, was there anything here that you feel was pitched specifically at your generation?
No, I don't think so at all. I actually don't think so at all. I don't think anyone has really talked about what it's like for people who I feel like what's going on here is they're only trying to reach their idea of the working class. I feel like they're not really addressing the fact that the middle class is hollowed out. And when they address the upper class, it's only because they need to be taxed out the wazoo. And so really the only people who I feel like are being spoken to are people who literally can't eat, people who can't put food on the table. But there are a bunch of people, a lot of people I know who can eat. In fact, they probably eat sweet green a lot of the time, but are light years, despite being maybe white collar workers, are light years away from ever owning a home or things like that. Anyway, there are a bunch of different versions of that. Just people who feel like they did everything right to do better than their parents and at least stay in the middle class. And I don't think there's anyone who is telling that story.
Isn't that weird for a DNC that's supposed to be we're the party of young people, that there's nothing being pitched at young people except celebs, billionaire celebs?
I mean, it's extreme confidence in their hammerlock on the vote of young people. And they've had that for a long time. And that has been shifting, as you've seen, with Donald Trump. But there is the presumption always that there is going to be, these are our constituents, and it might change when they get older, but right now our constituents will always be us. I think there's a real thought that is the case.
I also just don't think they want to acknowledge economic policy, because then you have to deal with the fact that inflation is what it is.
Right.
And anyone discussing just how expensive things are, you have to, some of that responsibility has to fall on Biden and therefore Kamala. Yeah.
Peter, do you think this is being pitched differently than other conventions vis-a-vis young people?
Well, I think what is interesting is that at the Republican convention last month, there was a lot of talk about, a lot of talk that was targeting younger people. I mean, we heard this from, J.D. Vance, Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Amber Rose. Come on,
yes,
man.
Yes, Katie Britt. Yeah. I mean, I'm talking about like the would-be president. Yes,
okay,
her too.
Okay, sure.
They all talked about sort of the difficulty of securing a mortgage, or there was inflation. That's a more short-term concern, but there are these bigger structural issues like will you ever own a piece of real estate? Will you be able to afford college for your children? And then the bigger picture of like, will your children be better off than you are? I think a lot of them sort of understand that they won't be as well off as their parents were. There was much more, I think, at least at the RNC, it seemed to me, the sort of acknowledgement of sort of the very steep climb that younger Americans are faced with. I think a lot of that has to do with who is now running the Democratic Party, who runs the Republican Party, and as has been talked about a lot. You've talked about this, Batya. Like the Republican Party is a much more, sort of middle working class party now, and increasingly the Democratic Party and the DNC feels like sort of a production of the managerial class. It feels like it's very. I mean, the DNC is a much better party. It's excellently produced. It's slick. It's fun. It's splashy. The DNC. It's full of like the flashing lights. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yes, like Kid Rock. They got John Legend, and the Republicans had Kid Rock. Right. I mean, everything about the RNC was kind of like it's sort of like a sad throwback. It's like, can't we just go back to being just the Spicoli? Whereas the Democrats are great at putting on like a show. Like the roll call last night was actually kind of entertaining, which is weird.
DJ,
yes,
there's Little John,
but like that, all that is weirdly kind of camouflages or masks the fact that there's almost zero discussion at the DNC of what these people want to accomplish.
Right. So here's the thing, and this is a question that I've been rolling around in my head because obviously Kamala Harris is in the honeymoon period. She's getting a big bump in the polls, and it happens, I don't know if this is correlation or causation, to not be talking to the press, which, by the way, also should talk about the fact that the press doesn't seem to care that she's not talking to the press.
Right.
People say this is a great strategy. I'm not so sure about it. And the reason I'm not so sure about it is you're going to get the exhale bump. Because every Democrat was like, geez, Joe Biden, that's not. But if you want to be the party of young people, of the working class, the people that like, we're going to lift you up. You can buy a home with these policies, whatever it might be. You have to affirmatively make that case to them. You're going to get the bump, but you're saying, yeah, this is great. If we don't talk to anyone, we're not going to go down one single point. That is not, it's going to change. But I think that there's also a thing that when you're out there making points and not saying price gauging instead of price gouging, Lord, this person's unprepared.
That's the kind of mistake I would make. But
you're not running for president.
I know. We were all at the RNC. Yeah. So here's, I think, the main difference to me so far, and it's granted, it's day 3, she hasn't spoken yet, but at the RNC, I'm curious if you guys agree with me. There was no moment at which it was not very clear to anyone there why you would vote for this party. Like, how they are going to make your life easier. Like, every day had a theme. The first one was affordability. The second one was safety. And then there was immigration. Like, it was very clear who they were talking to and how they were going to how they were telling you, we're going to make your life better in this way. At the DNC, it seems like the reason to vote for Kamala Harris is because a bunch of extremely wealthy, successful, famous people are telling you to.
Basically, I think that's basically right.
I think it appears to you that way because the RNC message, you walk in there and you're like, these are my people. Like, I think it's just because the message resonates.
So what is the message here?
I spoke to a lot of Democratic voters today asking just very basic questions like, why are you a Democrat? What Kamala policy are you excited about? And like at least half of people actually had really specific policies. Like a few. I mean, I didn't have time to fact check them, but they named stuff, about housing, like actually about housing. But I think you're right. I think you're right, though, that they're operating based on, I think they're playing, I think she's not giving interviews because she knows that so many people are just voting based on a referendum of Trump. I actually think it is kind of a good strategy. If I were her head of comms, I would literally be like, do minimal interviews, only speak to friendly press, because I do think that there are so many people. I think that's a huge reason why more protesters didn't show up, because they're like not as motivated now that they have Kamala. They really were against Biden. And so I think that there are, of course, voters whose opinions could change. There are votes that are in play, but I think it's a huge risk for her to.
There's a small number now, and I will do a John McLaughlin group end to this, which you wouldn't know because you're too young. Olivia Reingold, wrong. All right, we've been talking about Barack Obama quite a bit. We're going to play a little clip of Barack Obama, who wrote a book, a good book actually, called Dreams from My Father. But this is Barack Obama talking about his grandmother.
I also think one of the reasons Mary and I became so close was she reminded me of my grandmother, the woman who helped raise me as a child. And on the surface, the two of them did not have a lot in common. One was a black woman from right here, south side of Chicago, right down the way. Went to Englewood High School. The other was a little old white lady born in a tiny town called Peru, Kansas. Now, I know there aren't that many people from Peru. No nation, no society has ever tried to build a democracy as big and as diverse as ours before. One that includes people that over decades have come from every corner of the globe. One where our allegiances and our community are defined not by race or blood, but by a common creed. We live in a time of such confusion and rancor, with a culture that puts a premium on things that don't last. Money, fame, status, likes. We chase the approval of strangers on our phones. We build all manner of walls and fences around ourselves, and then we wonder why we feel so alone. We don't trust each other as much because we don't take the time to know each other. And in that space between us, politicians and algorithms teach us to caricature each other and troll each other and fear each other. But here's the good news, Chicago. All across America, in big cities and small towns, away from all the noise, the ties that bind us together are still there.
Welcome back, everybody. We're so excited to have you here with us. And joining us is Senator Nina Turner, former state senator from Ohio, former Bernie Sanders surrogate, a woman that I admire very, very deeply, even though there are many things we don't agree about.
You're not supposed to say that.
And I am so grateful to you. You've written for me at Newsweek and helped me understand a side of politics that is very, very important to our nation. I feel like we are in a we together, and that is so much more important than anything happening in any other place on earth. And so I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you both.
So you're a floor delegate for Ohio.
Yes.
You're very vocal for the uncommitted vote and that cause. Are you supporting Kamala Harris? Are you going to vote for her? How do you see your role in this moment?
Well, I'm waiting to see more policy rollouts. I'm not one of those Democrats that are jumping to it. I want to make sure that material conditions for everyday people in this country change. So far, some of the economic things that she has rolled out, we need more details. But, I'm pretty pleased with those. In terms of the uncommitted, right now there's a sit-in happening with the uncommitted voters right now, just kind of spontaneously, because the DNC allowed, rightfully so, a Jewish family to talk about their son that was maimed and also kidnapped and is still held there now, 320 days, I believe. And it was such a touching and moving speech. And one of the things the parents said, and I'm a parent, so I was starting to tear up. I have a son, and I'm tearing up that, and I'm paraphrasing them, the hostages must be returned, and there must be a type of liberty and justice for everybody impacted. Now I'm paraphrasing them, but it was such a moving and inclusive, recognizing Palestinian lives, but also talking about their pain. It's not a but, talking about their pain as parents because they haven't not seen their son. And the hostages must be returned, and there should be a permanent ceasefire and a path to real peace, justice for both peoples. Now, the DNC, though, decided not to allow a vetted, they asked for a vetted, the uncommitted said vet a Palestinian and allow them a chance to speak so that the members of the DNC could hear, both pains. People are suffering. And the DNC said no. So now the uncommitted voters are sitting in.
Why did they do that? And it was a vetted speech. I mean, the speech they would have seen
every
it
speech is vetted, right? Exactly.
And my understanding was that the person they had chosen was going to come out and support Kamala Harris. Mm-hmm. Why did they say no?
I don't know. I have some speculation. It might be unfair to speculate. So I don't know. I will say that I think it is wrong. And if they want to win, we know that the uncommitted voters started with President Biden, obviously, when she becomes officially the nominee tomorrow night. She has to wear some of that. I don't think that their request is unreasonable by any stretch of the imagination. If they want to win, if Democrats want to win, they are going to have to answer the cries of the uncommitted movement.
The DNC is, a pretty formidable organization. I mean, you work for
a private corporation.
A private corporation, which is what Marianne Williamson said.
Yeah.
When you're somebody who is on the kind of more left wing of the Democratic Party, uncommitted, talking about the Palestinian issue, how do you feel that they treat you and deal with that dissent within the party?
They don't. They
just ignore it.
They ignore it, but at their own peril. President Biden, I mean, we elect presidents in this country by the Electoral College. It's not going to be the popular vote. Michigan, President Biden barely won.
Yeah.
We got Wisconsin. These are about 5 or 6 key states that they can't afford to lose any margins. You had 100,000 voters come out in an uncontested primary and vote uncommitted. You had in Michigan, you had 50,000 in Wisconsin. You start adding up those voters. I don't think those voters are necessarily going to go to Trump because Trump and Biden hold similar policy positions on the state of Israel. But what is going to happen is they're going to alienate those voters and they won't come out to vote in the Electoral College. It matters.
Do you want to watch a little bit of Vice President? All right. That was possibly future Vice President Tim Walz. I was looking at you. I wasn't trying to.
You were looking at me.
I was trying to I was like, what is she? But I saw a head nod on "No child will be hungry." And I didn't see a lot of other head nods. Is that a fair assessment?
It's fair. I mean, I think in this country we should have universal breakfast and lunch. It's a shame that we don't. We are a hegemonic nation. I was kind of trying to take them in a little bit to try to figure out, where he was going. The reason why I kind of hesitated a little is because the Biden-Harris, the vice president is both running for president, but also is tied to the Biden administration. And so all of these wonderful things that my fellow Democrats are talking about, they could have done, especially in the first 2 years of the Biden administration. I don't want to hear nothing about cinema. I don't want to hear nothing about mansion. You carry a big stick. You need to walk softly and carry a big stick. There's a way to try to get members of your party to try to do the right thing. It's called negotiation. It's called, hey, I'm going to rain down on you if you don't. So the fact that they did not pass increasing the federal minimum wage in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, $7.25 for well over a decade, troubles me. And then they blamed it on the parliamentarian. Paid family medical leave, why don't we have it? So those things trouble me. So I know that this is a cheerleading fest. I'm just a different kind of Democrat. So I'm gonna take them at face value that when she's in the first chair and he's in the second chair, they're gonna do a new thing because it is important for our viewers to understand she's the vice president, so you got to march to the drum to the beat of the president. But I've just heard these things over housing and healthcare is a right. Well, yeah, it is a right. So why don't we have universal healthcare? Why, as a country, are we allowing corporations to gobble up property in this nation to drive up rents and price people out of being able to live in the communities where they grew up? Hello, Chicago. Hello, New York, Seattle, places like that. So, no, you saw me right. And then the Project 2025, this drives me absolutely insane. I want to know where the Democrats' Project 2025 is. It's one thing to point out that the Republicans have a plan to destroy this country and take us backwards. Once you tell me that, I want to know what your plan is to move the country forward. I don't see that in the Democrats, and I see this Project 2025. We should be concerned, but I see it as a scare tactic.
I mean, I think you're right about that, particularly in the Project 2025 stuff. But does it bother you that, you know, these are the things that you say need to be enumerated by Kamala Harris and by this campaign? Sure. And she's not talking to the media because the poll numbers been going up.
She didn't come to the free press.
Yeah, we asked.
Man, I'm about to make a call.
Yeah, can you call her
right now?
I think you can you WhatsApp her right now? Yeah, I mean, she's gonna come. But you know, do you think that she should be out there talking policy and not saying, you know what, I'm floating right now. Let's see if I can remain floating for a little while.
And just to add to that,
yes.
So she does seem to be headed policy-wise in the opposite direction than what you might want, right? I mean, in 2019, she was much more radical on every single one of the issues that she spoke to. Everything we've heard so far this round is a kind of moderation. So I guess my question is, does that worry you? But also, I mean, why are you still a Democrat given, I mean, your experience with Bernie Sanders, your experience here, explain that to us.
I probably need my head examined. Einstein defined insanity. I'm trying. There's so many faithful that want people like me to stay and to raise hell. Two major parties, unfortunately, in this country, not a whole lot of room yet. I hope one day, and I hope I live to see it, to have an independent party. I just want to raise hell inside. So there's some people on the outside. For now, I'm on the inside. Who knows if I'll stay. But I do feel at times like I'm beating my head up against the wall. They rigged the election against Senator Bernard Sanders in 2016. They rigged the election against him in 2020. We all may remember when the top 4 or 5 candidates all coalesced around, or the top four candidates coalesced around the vice president at that time, Biden, who was not doing very well. But they all got a call, so they jumped the race, and they jumped out of the race and all got behind President Biden.
It's a,
So it's a legitimate question. I don't know.
But is there anything, I mean, so for example, I mean, I'm hung up on this, but so the head of the Teamsters was welcomed at the RNC and gave the most progressive speech of any convention in the last, 30 years, right? Something like that. He yelled at Republicans for 25 minutes about how to treat workers better. And for that crime, he was ghosted and disinvited from the DNC. I mean, is there any moment at which you would give the Republican Party in its new populist iteration a second look, or is that totally
They're faux populist? I mean, they not real.
You don't buy it.
The one thing that I do agree, you didn't see me, I was kind of taking it in, is when the governor talked about the type of freedom that Republicans want us to have. Mm-hmm. They don't want us to be free to really chart a path that is progressive. They want they want a type of freedom that continues to divide people in this country. I think he was absolutely right about that. Today's Republican Party is nowhere near where the Lincoln Party, where Lincoln was, and even back then it wasn't perfect. But the radical Republicans, I mean, they do have a history. They were the ones that stood up against chattel slavery of my ancestors, and it was the Democrats that wanted to enslave us. I don't necessarily think parties have switched places, as I hear all the time. I just think that both parties are captured by corporate interests. Mm-hmm. And that pains me greatly. Mm-hmm. And I wish that the American people had another choice. They don't have it yet, but I think they might have it one day. So, no, I can't look at the Republicans, especially the federal ones, because they
What's your read on why so many black men, Hispanic voters have found in Trump something to admire, something even to vote for?
Well, Madam Editor, I'm glad you asked me that question. For me, the Democratic Party emasculates black men. Wow. And I think Hispanic men probably feel the same way. And I say this because they weaponize identity. When and where we enter, who we are, how we identify is important to who we are, just like our fingerprints. But if you're not going to use my identity to advance a social justice cause, and you're just going to use my identity as a blunt force object, now I got a problem. And so what the Democratic Party does, they put black women on a pedestal and they say, we're the mothers of the movement, or we saved the party. But yet you don't put forth policies that save black babies. You don't put forth policies that deal with the maternal death rate of black women and black babies in the United States of America. You don't do those things that lift and edify. Yes, identity is important. Both parties use it differently. Republicans use it to say that everybody black or brown or of a mixed race is somehow kind of way a DEI hire. They use it to say certain books will be banned. Don't tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about how this country was formulated, because you might hurt a white child's feelings by saying that, yeah, chattel slavery existed, and oh, by the way, white powerful folks stole the land from the indigenous people. So all of those things, Chinese Exclusion Act, I mean, we can go down the list. But Democrats use it in a way that alienates other folks, and it offends me. So when I talk to black men across this country, they don't see themselves in this party. It's one thing to recognize the power and prowess of black women and the sacrifices that we make. It is another thing to put us above black men. The black struggle, black men and black women have to be together. We don't have the luxury to be separated, and so I resent the Democratic Party for doing that. And so black men do not see themselves in the party. That bravado, you know, because we got a kind of masculine energy, and masculine energy is not all bad, but the type of bravado that Trump puts forward is still very much rooted in a hierarchical patriarchy, and a lot of men gravitate to that.
Yeah, I mean, so is it, I mean, you feel in a way, it's tokenization in a way if they don't pay any attention to it, right?
If it the mic, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yes.
We're falling apart at the end of the night. But that's, I mean, that's essentially.
That's exactly.
And is it a thing that I've seen, you know, a lot of people, and you know, particularly certain kind of left-wing scholars say that, yeah, we've focused on identity for a long time, and it's been a lot of words at the expense of class. Class is an important element, and that is not something the Democratic Party wants to deal with. You said this about Bernie Sanders, and I talked to him about this before. You know, everyone knows that, you know, they thumbed the scale, to put it very mildly, in, you know, 2016.
They put bodies on the scale.
They put bodies on the scale, right? There's a follow-up question that I think everyone thinks that we presume that we know the answer to this. Why? Why is the Democratic Party, you know, trying to box out somebody who's very popular, his policies are very popular, he's a very effective speaker, he has this kind of consistency that you don't have a conversation, well, Kamala Harris said this in 2020, she says this now, because this is the direction of the party. Why is the party afraid of somebody who could actually win? It's not like you're wasting time with somebody who can't win. I think Bernie Sanders could have won.
He could have beat Trump. I believe that. They're opposite ends of the spectrum. Trump is a faux populist. Senator Bernie Sanders is a real populist who really believes in the power of the people. I think they fear it because both political parties, private organizations, I want our viewers to understand this, that control our electoral system are captured. So you have corporate capture of both major parties. And so corporations don't want us to have health care for all. Corporations don't want us to drive down the cost of pharmaceutical drugs so that we can pay the same amount that our sisters and brothers in Canada, by way of example, pay. They don't want that. And so these corporations spend billions of collective dollars every single year to lobby members of the Congress and the people running for the presidency so that they can stay in control. It is very simple. Just follow the money. Follow who's donating the money, how much money they're donating, how these corporations are investing multi-millions of dollars that adds up to billions of dollars collectively to really, bribery is legal in the United States of America. So the reason why they didn't want somebody like Senator Bernard Sanders, because he really was going to do his best to put the power in the hands of the people and hold corporate interests responsible. We need real campaign finance reform in this country if we're ever going to get some of the nice things that people like myself and Senator Sanders and others were and still are fighting for.
There's been something, I have to go back to the uncommitted Gaza conversation. There's been something happening that it seems to me kind of like one of these social media phenomenon, but maybe has a deeper truth in it, where over the last couple weeks since Harris became the nominee, you've seen sort of Black influencers and activists and the pro-Palestine influencers and activists kind of, there's a split emerging to where you're seeing a lot of frustration that I think is pretty just on behalf of the Black activists who are saying, look, it's our time to think about our needs right now, which are extremely pressing, and then a lot of frustration by the Palestinian side of things saying, well, how dare you abandon us in this moment, you know? I'm curious what you think about that, and that sort of whether there is a natural connection between the Black struggle here and, you know, whether that energy that's being expended on this issue in the Middle East is not taking away from more pressing issues here at home.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. Congresswoman Tlaib and I penned an op-ed about the similarities or the connection, the connective tissue between the Black liberation struggle and the liberation struggle of Palestinians. We know that President Nelson Mandela, when he was alive, he talked a lot about that struggle, humanizing the Palestinians. So did Minister Malcolm X and countless other leaders, but I'm naming those two in particular. This is more than one thing can be true at once. Mm-hmm. And I think with my community, because I don't know if she's Palestinian or Arab American, but she came at me. And I'm one of the biggest allies.
Oh, that's crazy.
And I had to go in there. You know, my team don't like me going in there, but I went in there and said, how dare you. She had some choice words for me, and then she ended it with, please shut up. Okay, now the first thing that you're not going to do is tell me, a Black woman with agency, to shut up. Now, I've been told to shut up a lot of times by people on Twitter who would never say those things to my face, but it is a microaggression. I take it very personally that you're telling a Black woman with agency that I need to shut up. More pointedly, to your point, both things are true. Mm-hmm. While the Black community feels very much abandoned by this country, and we don't have similar allyship, and what I mean by that is that the Black liberation struggle has allowed the liberation of every other marginalized person. Just follow it. Economically, socially, politically. As Black people fight for liberation, every other group gets that same liberation. But the same love and respect is not given to Black people. You have groups of people, and I'm speaking very generally, so folks don't be atting free press and all of that. I am making a generic
they're
statement.
Adding free press right now.
Right?
Yes.
Because I want to be clear that I am making a generic statement. That the same love and commitment to the struggle of Black Americans whose ancestors were chattel slaves on this land is not shown. Now, do we have some folks that stand by our side every now and then? Yeah, but I'm talking about deep-seated, we gonna be with our Black sisters and brothers because we see our liberation through them. I don't think any other group in this country can be liberated without full Black liberation. So Black people are offended. And when you have Arab Americans, some, who would, in my grandmother's words, fix their mouths to tell Black people that we need to be on the front line of their struggle, that is offensive. Now, there are a lot of Black people on the front line of the struggle. I'm one of them. Dr. Cornel West is another. They're numerous. Mm-hmm. But what you cannot do, Arab Americans or any other group, is to tell Black people what we must do. That's where the offense takes place. And to the extent, and there are some people who understand that. One of my dear friends, Rania Patrice, she understands that. But there are a lot of people, and I think others are making mischief. Some of these things might be bots, trying to stir up tension between Arab Americans and the Black community. What I would say is that the struggle is similar. And when you are a humanist, I mean, I call myself a hell-raising humanitarian. I'm not going to enumerate how many times you come out. Now, I want you there when I'm struggling. But if I got to enumerate how many times you come, then I got to question whether or not I'm a humanitarian. the suffering over in Gaza, the hostages that were taken on October 7th, the people that were killed on October 7th. You know, Congresswoman Tlaib and I have both said similar things in terms of an Israeli baby crying and a Palestinian baby crying. You can't tell the difference between their cries. People who are enlightened in this particular movement, because people have asked me, you know, S&T, why are you fighting so hard? You ain't got no relatives over there. They don't fight as hard for us. And what I say is that I am not going to base my recognition of somebody else's humanity on how hard they fight for me. There is a however, though. There has to be a collective consciousness awakening among people of color, among marginalized people, to understand that the black community has a unique struggle in this country. And I'm talking about black Americans who are descendant. I gotta say this because the ADOS movement is very important, because not all black people have the same experience. I'm talking about black Americans who are foundational to this country, or other words, black Americans whose ancestors were chattel slaves. I think people take that for granted, and they don't love black people as much as we love humanity. It doesn't make us a perfect people, but black people are usually on the front lines for most marginalized groups.
But I feel like it's so much worse, because I feel like all these other marginalized groups steal valor from the ADOS community. Yeah. Like, they use, like, the Americans descended from slaves and the black struggle, whether it's, you know, and you see each group, like, coming up and saying, now it's our turn, and the Democratic Party, I'm sorry, getting totally sidetracked by this stolen valor, and each time they move from one thing to the next, and it's so frustrating.
And that's why I don't like that identity. I totally agree with you. Reparations. I want to hear the Vice President. I wrote, you know, Newsweek.
Yes.
My editor right here. We need a black agenda, and part of that black agenda is reparations. So definitely I'm miffed when President Obama, you know, basically said, you know, he's not the president for black people. I think Vice President Harris has been asked similar questions even before she started running for the presidency. You cannot, in the United States of America, say that you are for true freedom and liberation without recognizing the harm generationally, even to this day, that has been done to black descendants of enslaved people. Let me take Black Wall Street, for example. You both know there were 4 elders alive, all over the age of 100. 2 of them have died. They went before Congress. All they got was pats on the back and atta girl, atta boy, and so sorry you went through that. Now, if you can't look into the eyes of those elders who were children at the time that a white mob came and destroyed their community, burnt it down, stole their stuff, if you cannot say that they deserve reparations, then who else, how else are we gonna get there? Congress did absolutely nothing for them and sent them on the way. 2 have died since. 2 are still alive, and they're still fighting to get reparations for themselves and for their descendants. So absolutely, other groups of color and marginalized groups are gonna have to come to grips with the black liberation struggle and not tell black people we need to wait. And it is offensive, and the black community is very much offended. And I'm generally speaking about the black community too.
Nina Turner, I would never tell you to shut up.
I appreciate that.
I'm slightly terrified of you.
That person would not do that in my face.
Yeah, because I wouldn't do it on Twitter either, because I would also be afraid of you there too.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming out and watching Tim Walz's speech with us, and we appreciate you watching. Lots of you out there. We're going to be back tomorrow for the final night and another marathon session of Free Press Live. Thank you, Batya. Thanks, you, everyone, for joining us. Have a good night.